progress novel, Canebrake. And without further ado, Quincy, please take it away.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you everyone for coming. So I have a couple of sections from Canebrake with me now. And first, I just want to discuss a little, in general, kind of like what I think about. Like, I write fiction in order to like investigate these questions I have. I write fiction, but I also kind of draw, and I'm really interested in general in like maps. So people are asking me about like my visit so far at Sag Harbor. This is only my second time here. The only other time here, we were staying, my partner and I and her family were staying in the East Hamptons, and we came here for the movie theater. And so now I've been here for 3 weeks, so this is my second time here, and of course the longest time I've been here. But prior to that, I have looked at the map, unfolded a map, and I've been staring at the streets of Sag Harbor and all kinds of other places in the world for a long time. In terms of over the years, but also when I look at it, I look at it for a long time. So there's places in the world I've been to for the first time, and I know my way around. Like the first time I've been to Chicago, you just see a street sign, and I'm like, I know where north, south, east, west. I know where to go. I know how many, whatever. My mother's side of the family's from Detroit. But she was living in Alabama when she met my father. And so there's this kind of northward kind of trail from I-75. You hit Georgia, go 75 to Detroit. And so when the southern side of my family would go to Detroit, it was always, and this is the older generation, like my parents' generation, and even beyond that, would go visit family in Detroit, and they would just get to Detroit, and then go to a phone booth and call, and be like, we're here. And someone would come pick them up. And I remember when my brother graduated from high school, this was like in Atlanta, I was like, we should go to Detroit and celebrate your graduation. And so we hopped in the car and we drove. We just drove right in the driveway. And all my relatives were like shocked. My cousin were like, we just ringing the doorbell. And they're like, wow, like you know where our house is? You just got here? And I was like, I probably didn't go the most efficient way. But I saw that street, and I knew if I stayed on that street all the way, I would just roll through the streets. But I just know and this is, of course, this is before maps are ubiquitous. So this is like, you pull out a map, you look at it, you memorize it, and get in the car and go. This is how I did it anyway. And and so all that to say that it's really been a pleasure being here, and I'm a long distance runner, and so while I was here, I ran 4 times a week. And so seeing all of these lines on a piece of paper, like come into my reality as I'm running through them, has probably, more than any of the other contexts I can bring in to play, has really had a major effect on me. I don't even know what will come of it yet, but definitely like running through these signs and just having a memory of like what it looked like on a page it gives a little sense of like how I think about things and think about the world. And I write very like historically, and that history starts like with a place. So when I read, you'll kind of see I start from a place, and I wonder like why is there a street called Middletown Lane or whatever? You know what I mean? Like it's at the end of why is there a street called Merchants Street? Things like that is really what is interesting to me, and like what streets lead to the harbor, the custom house, Main Street, the bank, the jailhouse. All of those things are like how before I have people, I'm thinking about like how things are organized. where the resources are, where the port is it a river, is it a harbor, things like that is what I think about a lot. And so specifically in Sag Harbor, there's one thing I also think about a lot is like African American planned communities. So also Sag Harbor, we have Sands, where we have Sag Harbor Hills, Azores, and how do you pronounce? I've never pronounced or heard anybody pronounce. So maybe you could help me. Nineveh?
Nineveh.
Yeah, Nineveh.
Yeah.
And so I spent most of my runs running over there and then through those neighborhoods. And so the artist in residencies, we like stayed 2 blocks down Madison. So from there, I'm like running over, well actually I started, I run down to the harbor and then I run around. And then I zigzag through all these streets and thinking about all those things. And so what I want to do today is just frame that I think about these planned African American communities throughout the history of America. Because I don't think they're really in the popular imagination as they should be. I don't even know if people know about any of them, let alone there's a lot of them. And so I want to start with reading a couple of advertisements for some of them. And an advertisement for a couple, there's in Kansas in 1877, there was a town, Nicodemus, Graham County. And then a little, almost 100 years beyond that, in North Carolina, there's Soul City. So I just kind of want to frame my reading with reading text about these two communities. Is this coming through? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
And this document is coming from the Kansas State Historical Society, titled, this is 1877, titled, "To the Colored Citizens of the United States." Nicodemus, Graham County, Kansas, July 2nd, 1877. We, the Nicodemus Town Company of Graham County, Kansas, are now in possession of our lands and the town site of Nicodemus, which is beautifully located on the northwest corner, section 1, town 8, range 21, in Graham County, Kansas, in the Great Solomon Valley, 240 miles west of Topeka. And we are proud to say it is the finest country we ever saw. The soil is of rich, black, sandy loam. The country is rather rolling and looks most pleasing to human eye. The South Fork of the Solomon River flows through Graham County nearly directly east, west, and has an abundance of excellent water, while there are numerous springs of living water abounding throughout the valley. There is an abundance of fine magnesium stone for building purposes, which is much easier handled than the rough sand or hard stone. There is also timber, plenty for fire use, while we have no fear but what we will find plenty of coal. Now is your time to secure your home on government land in the Great Solomon Valley of western Kansas. Remember, we have secured service of W.R. Hill, a man of energy and ability to locate our colony. Not quite 90 days ago, we secured our charter for locating the town's site in Nicodemus. We then became an organized body with only $3 in the treasury and 12 members. But under a careful management of our officers, we have now nearly 300 good, reliable members, with several members permanently located on their claims. With plenty of provisions for the colony, while we are daily receiving letters from all parts of the country from parties desiring to locate in the Great Solomon Valley of western Kansas. For maps, circulars, and passenger rates, address our general manager, W.R. Hill, North Topeka, Kansas, until August 1st of 1877, then at Hill City, Graham County, via Trago. The name of our post office will be Nicodemus, and Mr. Z.T. Fletcher will be our NASP. And beneath that is Nicodemus. Nicodemus was a slave of African birth and was bought for a bag full of gold. He was reckoned a part of salt of the earth, but he died years ago, very old. Nicodemus was a prophet, at least he was wise, for he told of the battles to come, how he trembled with fear when he rolled up his eyes, and we heeded the shake of his thumb. And the chorus read, good time coming, long, long time away. Run and tell Elijah to hurry up, to meet us under the cottonwood tree in the great Solomon Valley at the first break of day. So that's Nicodemus, Kansas. And then we fast forward to the 1960s. There's a planned community called Soul City in North Carolina. And I'll read, published in February 27, 1967 in Jet magazine, a snippet about this town. So this is, McKissick names men to guide the birth of Soul City. In Chapel Hill, North Carolina, Floyd B. McKissick named the men who will guide the creation of Soul City in Warren County, North Carolina. Jet magazine, January 30. They are Dr. John A. Parker of the Department of City and Regional Planning at the University of North Carolina, Professor Daniel Pollitt of the University of North Carolina Law School, and President Albert Whiting of North Carolina College of Durham. The New York-based Black architectural firm of Enfield, Johnson, and Honor has chosen to design the new town. Although Soul City is to be built by Black people, it is not to be exclusively for people of any race, and in fact, is open to people of all races who are sympathetic with the aims and objectives of those who believe in the right of Black people to control their destiny. Yeah, I'll stop there. Okay. Cut to that. So that's the kind of, tech context that, along with maps and stories from my own childhood, and to say a little bit of my own childhood, speaking of like where I summered, I was born in Uniontown, Alabama, and I never lived there because I am from Sarasota, Florida. But I was born December 26th, so we were at my grandparents' house for Christmas, and I was born in Uniontown, Alabama, and that is the place where both my grandparents were living, and I was dropped off as a child every summer, for most summers, or 90% of my upbringing I spent every summer there. And both sides of the family have their own different histories of how they gained their land. On my mother's side, her great-grandfather was a Scottish guy who had a Scottish family, but had also a side girl who was my great-great-grandmother, and so our line comes from that. And my grandfather, my mother's father, who's the child, was in between families because his mother remarried and had a family, and the father already had a family. And so he felt like he had nowhere to go, so at 16, he moved to Detroit, lied about his age, joined the Army. And so my mother was raised in Stuttgart, Germany, in West Berlin. In her senior year in high school, when her father retired from the military, they moved back to his hometown in Uniontown, Alabama, where the Scottish family left him all the land. And so on the other side of the ring. There's just a one little ring on that side. On my mother's side, you go to this other side, my father's side. His grandparents founded a church. And through the church, being a pastor, and I don't know what my great-grandmother would have been called at the time, but she had some kind of like office with the church as well. But made money through the church, and they bought their land through that endeavor. And so not only was I dropped off at these places, and we're talking about like 180 acres of land. So not only was I dropped off at these places, but I'm dropped off at a place where there's a dirt road coming from the main road. You drive on a dirt road, you see a house, you drive a little bit longer, you see another house, and you drive another house. This is my grandparents' house. The only reason why anybody would turn on that dirt road, or those were three of my relatives. It was like 182 acres. But when I got to my grandparents' house, you see their house, and right at the edge of the road, the dirt road, was it looked like a tool shed. So I remember being a kid and being like, what's that? And my dad being like, that's our first house. But my dad has 11 siblings. So by the time like the fourth child came along, they built a new house. And then I'm like, well, what's on the hill? What's the house on the hill? Because there was a big plantation on the hill. And it was like, that's the plantation. And so you pass our house and you go a little bit further down and take a left, and you slave quarters. Like I'm a kid, like with my own eyes, I grew up getting dropped off a place where there's a plantation on the hill, slave quarters down the way. You pass the slave quarters and there's a church. Pilgrim Baptist Church. And so today, fast forward all the way, and not only that, but they just didn't even, as I became an adult is when I was finally I'm like, wow, we got a plantation and slave quarters, and I'm getting all, so I call my grandmother, like, yo, we got access to go in the plantation? She's like, your uncle burned it down. Like he was clearing the land and the land caught fire and burned the whole house down. And I'm like, what? So, but it's just amazing to me that traveling the world and having these historical markers and everything, and I have in my family, they're sitting on history and just it's not treated as a monument like that. You know, in that land that I'm talking about is my father's father's side of the family. His mother's side of the family has their own story. You know, and just to be short, and this is my great grandmother, and I remember as a kid I was always told everyone she's 100 years old. So it was a shock when I was an adult when we actually had her 100th birthday. You know. But it was in that 100th birthday, and now I'm PhD candidate at the time, and all my family's like, you're gonna be the one, you need to sit down with her, and you're the, I'm not that kind of, I'm like a writer, a fiction writer, and they're like, oh, they're getting all you're gonna be writing our family history, you're gonna do this thing. But it was through that endeavor that we learned how she got the money to acquire, to buy the land and everything. She didn't even tell her husband this house, and I always wondered, and I didn't go over there that much. This is my great grandmother, and had different lines of our extended family and second cousins and third cousins over there. However, we'd be over there, there'd be barbecues, and there was this large merry-go-round made out of old wood and steel, and all 50 of us cousins can get on it. All 50 of us are standing outside of it, we push it round and round and round and round, and then we jump off and swing it around. And I always wondered, why the hell they have what is this? And then it was through that birthday party that she described, probably other people knew, but this is when I learned, that the house that we've been getting dropped off and they had lived in was the Negro elementary school. And it went from kindergarten to 5th grade. Kindergarten, 5 years old. It went from kindergarten to 5th grade, but my father, when he was in 3rd grade, they stopped it and they changed it where all of those children would go to the school in town. So they put up the school for auction, and my great grandmother, without even telling her husband, put a bid in and got it. And there we go. And then maybe she lived to 104, and when she died, I remember the next time I was in Uniontown, Alabama, we're driving by that, and there's no house. And I was like, where's grandma's house? And they were like, well, yeah, nobody knew who was gonna keep up with it, who was gonna pay the taxes and do this. And I'm like, hey, I mean, like, Alabama, are you kidding me? What do you mean? Like, that's a monument. Like, but anyway, so I feel like I write fiction because of this lack of like archival history. It's all these years spent at a dinner table where people have told me about like Detroit riots, told me about like the Uniontown, Alabama, when it was a bustling farming community, and I couldn't, as a kid, I'm like, there's nothing here. No one's farming, it's dilapidated, entropy is taking the whole place over. Even today, it's like that. So it was like all my life, throughout the 80s, 90s, now, like I've seen, there's no way I can imagine my dad was like, it was busy with farming and crops and et cetera. And the same thing with my mother, she talks about Detroit in the same way, with, the automobile like peaking, like Detroit had 1 million people at a time. So the city was built for a lot of cars, a lot of people, and then on my, like, from the 80s on, it just started, it touched that peak, and then it started going down, and, so that's where all this is coming from. And I'm not going to read all of this, but you'll get a little snippet of that. I didn't even set a timer. I'm probably already at 30 minutes before I even read it. So epilogue, what becomes of a dream deferred? It never makes it to the world to be seen or heard. Do we breathe? It's how I live quietly. I like to do now a sort of gut bucket bolero in a primitive rhythm executed in a pre-primitive manner. Duke Ellington. And this is from Canebrake, Lou Walker Road. Lou Walker Road wasn't long enough. It wasn't paved. A simple, ginger-tinted dust track formed by wheels and horse hooves traveling to and from the brick house my father built on Barney Land in 1933, dead-ended at a patch of woods where plum and pecan trees dotted the border. Beyond that is where we stepped in with our boots to get firewood, fence post wood, walking sticks, any kind of stick, for any purpose thought up after handling and considering a shape. Find a bowed, flexible branch, and all of a sudden, you imagine you have lost the ability to use a hand. Your hand falls off. You become salamander-like, able to regenerate a limb resembling an extra long ochre clipper. Those were the days, as they say. I do not quite understand why this is said so often. I suppose some speakers of these words are looking back to something lost, something changed unfavorably, so the words begin to lament. The woods, the pasture across the Walker, and the rolling hills backdropping the brick house, a combined 992 acres is what I think about when I think about home. It's what I think about when recalling childhood. The blue house sat opposite Lou Walker at the corner formed by the intersecting 109 highway. The only reason I went past the blue house was school and to carry my mother's jar of preserves to Red's or haul old man's okra to town. Canebrake was that kind of town, the kind of town people farm or clean house or maintain the side of the road along US 80 or work at the Donaldsons, the soap plant, Greenville, or McMillan's, the denim factory. There were school teachers, a doctor, some plumbers, and house painters like any other place has. But most of the people farmed. They didn't all farm a place they called their own. Some farmed a place too large for the owner to farm themselves, or a place, old man say, owned by a person too educated or too lazy, too old, maimed, or senseless to roll up his sleeves. Since I stayed nearer to the house than away from it, the closest one to me growing up was Rita, until I was 12, nearing 13. I was the youngest, October 21st, 1944, 11 months after Rita's November 6, 1943. People joked that she paved the way for me. She helped with mathematics, taught me how to understand Wordsworth and Edgar Allan Poe in the days when they and Shakespeare, Dickens, and Hawthorne were the only writers at South Red Creek taught through the books that they wrote. Rita was all-knowing as far as I was concerned. She knew all about life science too, and got out in the dirt with me, right at the edge of the woods near the house and the plum trees, and called out not only the names of the insects and creatures that we dug out or pulled down from a branch, but their genera as well. My mother used to say that we were joined at the hip, and I see why. But anywhere away from New Walker Road, nobody ever knew we were related. We'd ride the bus to and from and pass each other out at school, and it would be like nobody was there. Anyone who ever came to the hill was surprised to know that we were siblings. "Oh, you're a Nelson?" they'd say. I wasn't aware that we were moving along in a manner odd to conventional interfamily relationships until she was calling me self-centered, selfish, thoughtless, egotistical, solipsistic, narcissistic, mellow, misogynistic isms and is, all of which I had to look up. We were adults when she pulled me to the side to explain that I had no right to complain about how things turned out. What the hell was I nostalgic for was a real question. What sense was regretting any of the choices I made? She told me I should draft a narrative of her life if I wanted an exciting story to yap about. If I wanted to be the center of attention, I needed to know that stories were about struggle and conflict, falling or rising up, suffering for long enough and then rising. That was her story, the more compelling. People paying attention would respect it at every turn. They would feel her protagonist for sure, no question. She was looking at me while telling me all of this. She continued to look at me after she had said it. If she is right, and I no longer doubt that she is, how could I tell her story? How do I tell any story that lays bare the developments across situations she claims are so enthralling? On its own, believing her can only carry it so far. How to relay my own experiences, for that matter, so that another person deems them important? Why do we tell stories to ourselves, to others? Perhaps it is a fact that others see you better than you see yourself and get at the core of the matter of influences on your life. I spent a great deal of time studying Rita and her ways, and no doubt see things about her that she must not be able to see. And yet, numerous things about her I could never know. Her complaining about my selfishness, for one, and that being a shock to me. The secretive resentment realized in a heated moment. She'd been tolerating and hauling and making room for more straws, and then had enough. Her back broken, she cried out, and I was absolutely blindsided by it. I do not know, on the other hand, if there was anything at all about my life that she could not detect. She said things I thought were in my mind alone. I was a private person, even as a child, even now. She is the only one who truly ever knew me, because she is the only one who truly ever knew how terrified of people I've always been. Rita was attentive enough to notice that I had armored myself with an overly whimsical personality to get through awkward dealings with people who try to get to know me. Even when dealing with our family, I'd lightened up the conversation to avoid speaking my mind. Why don't you just tell them that then, Duke? Rita told me. When I told her I didn't want to be a preacher or a farmer because that was what an old man, farmer, and my mother, preacher, wanted me to do with my life. And they had been telling me so ever since I can remember. Rita said that I should act like it. Act like the person I conjured in my mind. Be that person without shame. I couldn't exist in my head forever. You scared you're gonna break their heart, she said. But it did not weaken either parent's idea of me to hear contradictions to their predictions, because time would tell. An old man and my mother were pretty sure that they had seen the signs all the while. So time was on their side. They were simply waiting for the day that they could finally say, I told you he was going to be a preacher, or I knew he was going to be the one to take over the farm. Throughout childhood, I'd be my father's apprentice and object of my mother's adoration. Whosever side time resided with had no bearing on me. I knew what I knew and did what I had to do. Still, just because I knew I didn't want to do those things with my life didn't mean I knew exactly what I would do. And everybody who's not born into it gotta do something with themselves if they expect to live. Make your living is what they say. Ain't that what the people always wanna know? How you make your living, what you do for a living, like we the maker of life. Oprah's catfish. Canebrake was the kind of town that didn't have one of those sky-high water tanks that rise up out of the ground like a gigantic pushpin. The town written in black so that you can see it from a car as you slide past. The highways are lined with those towns. Maybe somebody leave a town and become famous, and on the water tank in Botanic bold, their name is stamped, home of so-and-so, or birthplace of so-and-so. Maybe a farmer gets their corn to the regional groceries so that the tank reads, home of such and such a brand. I was telling someone not long ago that my family was from the Canebrake. Now I say I'm from the Canebrake, but I used to say when anyone asked that I was from Georgia or a small town in Meriwether County or something like that, depending on the situation. I never expected anyone was familiar enough with the Canebrake to make conversation about it. The stories told about what happens there are seldom brought together in places outside of it. I say the Canebrake and get ready for the next question. But this guy lights up. That's where you're from? He said. He found a little beard framed by an unfastened buttons on his shirt while telling me to get out of here, that I had to be kidding. He lit all the way up. I just ordered some catfish from the Canebrake, he said. Then he said that he read that Oprah Winfrey orders her catfish from there too, which was how he heard about it, and that it supposedly was the best catfish in the world. I laughed when he said it. I had evidently been mixing it up with the people who set my notions up for this hit. Oprah Winfrey, no doubt, must have a standing order. I wondered if she cared enough to imagine the logistics required to satisfy her taste for fish and grits now and again. It is the kind of news that was never lived down. People still talk about Bobby Brown stopping at a Chevron on Route 27 when he stopped for gas, chips, Little Debbie snacks, and chocolate milk. Eddie Lee, the gas station attendant on duty, had seen him. All anybody was ever saying was, according to Eddie Lee this, and according to Eddie Lee that. Next thing you know, 600 people were telling it like they were the ones in the store with Bobby Brown out there. A water tank could be painted in black letters welcoming folks to town. Oprah Winfrey's catfish farmed here. they would still be thinking about that when they passed the sign advising them that they had reached the city limits before the one welcoming them to Greenville. That's the official welcome, the incorporated lore. All would have individuals telling as they did with Bobby. Before there was Oprah, before Orpa was Oprah, I studied maps in my room for hours on top of other hours. I was all over the state or the country, anywhere in the world I had a map of the place. My favorite maps were street maps, city maps. I loved street grids. I loved the shape each city forced onto the plan for getting around, for moving resources throughout the land. And I pretend an entire life out like it was my responsibility to think about those things. I used to have one long, continuous fantasy that picked up from where the previous day's episode of the fantasy left off. Every day, for years of my life. It was like playing house. It was on an entirely unfolded street map that I looked at for hours on the floor in my room, driving downtown to work, running errands before returning home to a neighborhood I had never been to in real life. I pretended a life in Detroit long ago, patched together from maps and tellings. Picturing this, picturing that. It did not matter that none of it was real. An unfolded paper with marks drawn to scale. As soon as I saw a street sign, school name, neighborhood welcome sign, a church, park, statue, plaque, hotel, train station, bus stop, bridge, I was oriented. I'm still astonished at how much had been gained from pretending to be inside all those maps, all those years. I'll drive past the letters bin above the mouth of the Ambassador Bridge, and I'm taken back every time. I think it's funny how much consideration one can give something when they already have some knowledge of it. You cannot know what you do not already know quite a bit about. I crossed that bridge often, or had it spring into view while driving along East Jefferson, and I'd always be carried back to my room. I will never forget when my mother peeked in on me during one of these map studying sessions. I was entirely in when she brought me back with the sound of the door opening, and I hesitated because I was waiting for a voice. My back happened to be to the door, and the voice took a long time coming. Finally, my mother asked where I was going. You got that map out like you're going somewhere. Where are you going? She said, and I laughed. Then she laughed and shut the door. She returned later to say that Sam was in the front room. She was holding us in a smile that came busting out when I let out my own smile. I think I was smiling because it was apparent that she regarded my daydreaming, which made the world for me. She was aware of this region she created for me long before I realized it. She must have wanted to protect it. Otherwise, she would have sent her voice to find and interrupt me while she sat in the den screaming my name. When I walked Sam out to sit on the porch, he didn't want to. I ain't come to sit, he said. People acting crazy. That's what I'm here for. What you mean acting crazy? Amiri and a bunch of others, they down at Red's. People telling all of them we got a club. And he asked who was brave enough to join, told me to come get you so we could show them what a real man looks like. They down the road here now, and he pointed. What road? Right here? Then I pointed. Yep, they down at the Candy Ladies. He made sure I was looking at him. Then he said, he lost his mind, dude. He sounded all histrionic, seized the day, and all of that. It demanded more than I knew what to put in at the time, but all I said was, club, while thinking, histrionic. Yep, that's what he's talking about down there. Sam was just as calm as ever, sitting there looking across the barbed wire, like he told me something relevant simply for me to know. He He was looking out beyond the pasture, which we always did. They were down to the candy ladies, slumped against their elbows. It was a whole bunch of them. Some I had known, others I hadn't, but I'd seen them all. Some our age, others older, like Amiri. Peebo was facing the group of them, leaning back on his arms on a patch of grass, blaring out how he ain't scared of nobody. He go where he want, swim where he feel, what they gonna do about it. Then he reached around Sam as we were walking up and said, "Here you go. Tell him how you throw a rock at him, dude." Sam Sam threw his hands up and turned away. He found a spot in the yard and leaned back with his hands against the ground behind him, his legs drawn in so that his knees were up. One of the boys said that they should all leave. He didn't know that there was going to be a problem. He was pulling himself to his feet when someone else said, "Nah, let him tell it." And everybody stopped and looked at me. "Did you throw a rock?" Amiri asked straight out. He was looking on wide-eyed for a nod or a smile. Everyone was looking at me. If I cleared my throat and relayed that evening, motion to motion, right down to how we were stepping as if crossing a bed of hot stones, paving the trail, adding how Peebo was telling me not to fall behind, to keep running, describing how he kept the legs moving, our arms moving, without looking back. And Mary would have eaten it all up. All of them would have. "I ain't throw no rock," I said instead. "Oh, Duke, don't worry about nothing," Peebo said. "Then, who got some money? Who got some money to get some candy? Honor the man." Amiri and the twins, Don and Ron, were the only ones to stand and dig their pockets. Don ran into the blue house and came back with a 0 bar. Then he smiled when he handed it to me. The silvery wrapper, dulled by his shadow, was cold with condensation in my hands. Everybody sprinkled a few scattered offbeat hand claps. They took turns telling me that I was all right. Wish I could have seen their face soon as the rock hit. You crazier than sand. Peebo quieted everyone down and said that we were holding an open meeting to join the new club next week. He told them, "Ain't but 3 people in it right now. The rest have to be initiated." He explained that initiation is when you are asked to do something you are not quite sure you will survive, but you do it anyway. Like how the Acre Society decided its members. His father was thinking about joining, and he was proud, holding court in the center of a bunch of us spread out on the yard. No one said anything to that. I didn't know if it answered the questions about the Chrysler and Imperials and the Lincoln Continentals parked in his yard. "I thought folks who joined Acre were folks got money," one of the boys said, which was true. "Ain't your daddy one?" Another one asked this, and it was also true. They all knew that it was. Another boy who stayed at the bottom of the 2 hills asked what it meant to be a member. I looked at him and could only think about his dogs who rushed into the street on hearing the gears and chains clicking. 5 or 6 dogs and us pumping downhill so that we could make it uphill beyond their gravel lane. You never wanted to be first, and you especially didn't want to be last. "Old man, a member," I told him, simple as that. I looked at Amiri because I knew he would be looking at me. His eyes beamed. He was smiling, but he wasn't smiling, but his eyes were, because his grandfather, Red, was an Acre member too. "What's a member do?" "My daddy wanted to be one," Peebo said, before he stood to tell us something more. He pushed up and was looking down at each of us, passed his eye to one, then the other, so that everyone got excited. I began to like the idea and also thought maybe I did throw the rock. One boy asked what they had to do to get in. He didn't know if he'd be interested in throwing rocks at white folks, but there would be other things he would do. People explained that rock throwing was how he could earn high rate. A regular member not going to have to do all of that. But you'll learn when you have to do soon. You'll find out next week. When Peebo was done revealing some of his ideas about the club, I was expected to be the storyteller. A bunch of wide eyes waited at the edge for an opportunity to hear me, the boy who threw a rock at the white boys across town. They took turns with their questions, nodding at my responses and standing up the balls of their feet. Then one said, you showed them. They ought to not have been confused about who owned the road. What you tell him after you knock him upside his head? He told him that his daddy could buy the road, and all the roads in the Canebrake he wanted. I bet that got him. Of course it did. They got no sense about him. About time somebody told him. Right? Those poor white boys got some nerve thinking the way they do. And everyone laughed. I laughed. Those closest to me patted me on the back and shoulders. After the first one of them said that the sun was getting low, we went around to ensure that we shook hands and smiled into each other's eyes, and everyone's eyes, every one of them, contained a cat-like wakefulness. My memory has the moon bouncing red from these eyes, and in the low glowing light, that was all that could be made. That and the fraught figures collected in the yard. When they turned to leave, only the figures could be made. Peebo and Sam and two others kicked out ahead of the pack, and so the figures were fading. Everybody else, except for Mary, kicked out in the other direction. Some walked or ran, some rode bicycles, others were gone around the bend of trees by the time I glanced up 109. Mary asked if Rob was at home once we were alone. When I said he was, he said, "All right then, I'll walk down the road back with you." Now, I told him that I was. It was an awkward beginning to a walk because it was an awkward silence. No rocks crunching every time a foot came down. No memory of the warbler's chirp, leaves lumbering, or grass. No sound of metal splintering wood. No ripping or earth thumping. No voice of Mr. Pritchard reaching us from his wood stack. Picture Blue Walker Road in another manner, relative to the wake of the last time Mary and I had seen each other and pretend that our steps were forced down and made no sound. Thank you.
Yes, we'd like to open it up for Q&A if anybody has any questions. No, I don't know.
No.
And it's fine if not.
Is the book finished?
It's not. She asked if the book was finished. It's at the end, but it's not quite finished yet. Yeah.
Now I want to know.
Yeah. Not quite.
What, excuse me, what you just read to us was titled Epilogue, wasn't it?
For that first piece?
Yeah.
The first piece? Yeah, the first piece with the two quotes, one by Talib Kweli, who is a hip-hop artist,
And
and the other one was by Duke Ellington, jazz musician.
So what, the section that you just read, the last section that you read, where does that occur in the book?
Good question. Last section. Oprah's Catfish, that's probably around like the 4th or 5th chapter.
And how long do you think the book will be? How many chapters? I'm just wondering about
Yeah,
this.
no, it's a good question. It's about 280 pages. It's 18 chapters. Yeah.
And is, when you're talking about Black land communities versus a community like ours, which is not mine, but Black resort communities, I was wondering about, first of all, you referenced, when you were talking at the beginning, you were referencing your great-grandmother, getting enough money to actually buy the house. May I ask where the money came from? Because I asked that specifically because the Black resort community here was notable for, before it became those areas. The Eastville community, which preceded it in the 1840s, 50s, was full of women who were matriarchs of their community, and a lot of them made money from being seamstresses, but they, because their husbands were away whaling, and their children, they actually sort of commanded their worlds and were notable for their success, which was significant, and which I think, because it became an economic parallel with the rest of this community, there was great respect for them and for what the Eastern community was. And then when Amazali Merida and Terry, her sister, started with, I think Azuras was the first community, I'm not sure, and then anyway, what they started in terms of allowing people to get mortgages for land and live here, there was just a lot of strength. And the women, I was just wondering if that, because I sensed it in your description of your great-grandmother, is there like a part of your book that sort of reflects that? I'm just curious.
No, all of those are good questions, especially at the Sag Harbor, so everyone could hear the question, right? Yeah, the Sag Harbor, like around the 1940s version, is really interesting, but you're going back to like in the 19th century and the whaling communities. That is fascinating to me too. This idea that when the whalers are gone, you know, this opportunity to leave, you know, women with their name on the deeds of the property because the husbands might not make it back. You know what I mean? And so it sets them up for a situation that's very unusual at the time. I don't know if that particular framework where there was an entire community of people like my great-grandmother, that this was the case, in terms of a kind of industry, like all of the industry was the same. It was all farming, it was rural. And really and there's only the connection between this novel and my own background is only just kind of making up stories from all these like things I hear. But to answer your question about my grandmother, how she got her, and I don't know how, you know, she's like holding court telling stories, and I don't know how much this is factual, but when she was 5 years old, her father gave her a baby calf. So she just used to run around the yard with a baby calf, and they grew up together. And that baby calf had other babies. And so, like, through that one baby calf, she's got a milk cow, she's got cattle, she got a capital, basically. And so, and that's pretty much, even to this day, the only thing left of all like, maybe when I was in middle school, I would get dropped off in Uniontown, and there was still, you could see fields of corn, hogs, horses, mules. Like there was like, it wasn't like at the scale my father was farming at the time, but it was, you know, it was still like go outside, get an egg, get the corn, and cook it. It was like right there. By the time I was in high school, the only thing left was cattle. To this day right now, the only thing left is cattle. But that was just it was kind of an anomaly. I think one of the reasons why I think so much about class and affluent black families is because of kind of the chance luck I've always felt of driving to Uniontown and there's like trailers all over the side of the road. And being a kid, I'm like 7, asking my father, like, why are all these people on the side of the road in trailers, and we're going to 200 acres? And it's like that would have been our case too, because these are like they used to be their descendants were slaves, you know, and then after that everyone was sharecroppers. So all those people in trailers were sharecroppers, and they used to live on a land where they were sharecropping. But eventually, nobody in this town farms anymore. So the sharecroppers got put off the land. And so I've always felt like kind of lucky that I'm going to this place. We have this land, and no one could put us off. So it was kind of an anomaly. It wasn't like a major community of women like making money and buying homes or things like that. It's kind of and I will say, like my great grandfather, like they were together in their endeavors of their wealth, if you can call it that. However, it was simply, I think the unusual thing in the time was that my great grandmother had the freedom that her husband allowed her a liberty to spend money without telling him. You know what I mean? It wasn't like he wasn't even angry about it. He was just like, we bought a house. He was like, oh. And so he spent, even when I was around, he spent the rest of his life like dedicated to that property, but it was like something thrown to him by her like seeing an ad in the paper and being like, I'm gonna get this house, and they got the house. But those are all very good questions. But my angle of thinking about it is less about like this like industry whole situation that I'm thinking about, and more of a kind of like one foot in this kind of situation where there's like stability, but then a knowing that everyone else, like when I go to uni, like all my cousins, all my like the other people I know who are my age, they're really not in that situation. And so I think even in my adulthood, it's something I think about all the time. What does it mean? Like if you notice the first Nicodemus first planned community I read about, like in a lot of these communities, they were asking people to go west. And let's not forget to mention, like this Western movement, this is like to take over like Native American property. Like to be clear, so they were getting these ads to go west, but they were making it clear, like for poor black people, like we can't do that yet. Like this is an ad only for like if you have money to get a lot. We don't have, like once we get set up and we get the resources and we have the city going, maybe we can work you in. And so like that's something that I deal with a lot. And I don't think it gets talked about enough. Like everything's always black and white. And I think even within black communities, like poor black communities are struggling to have a voice because I think, affluent black communities are taking up all the mic. And they're the ones who have like the allegiances with power and things like that, and whose best interest is at hand. I think about that a lot. And like, what does it mean? Like my partner and I, we live in Bed-Stuy, New York, and it's it's complicated there a lot, but it's a really nice testing ground to have like mix of class, mix of all kinds of people there, and you really have to like, the fact that like you can't just gate up the community and remove yourself from poor people is a thing. We live beside all kinds of people, and it's something I think about all the time.
The Eastville community was technically largely Irish, but other European immigrants and Native Americans who suffered from the diasporas of being driven out of Montauk and stuff like that, and then African Americans. So it's a really interesting, unique kind of thing. I would just thank you for answering all that. I know that you're giving us personal history as well as parts of your book, so it's.
Yeah.
I don't mean to mix it up, but I'm just.
No, it's all mixed up. It's mixed up for me too.
It's very rich, and I just wanted to add that I love the way that you describe the way that your mother gave you permission to dream and play in your head. I thought it was such a beautiful description.
Thank you.
One thing I was also wondering is, are you, in your novel, thank you, in your novel, are you addressing, because I'm also thinking that actually the history of affluent Black Americans, African Americans, has been pretty much paved over in this country, probably in any country as well. And I'm wondering, with you talking about, from your experience, a relative affluence, is that something that you're addressing in the novel as well? Is that actually there's maybe an overriding narrative that black people have always been poor and not been able to do good, but actually that there have been amazing, thriving communities and successes, not just now with Beyonce and, you know, Jay-Z, that actually there has always been a history of black prosperity and thriving when there has been any opportunity. I mean, I was just recently in Tulsa, in Greenwood, visited that for the first time. That museum is incredible. Yeah, I was wondering if that's part of what you're talking about in your novel as well. And actually, one question, another one, just to understand. I saw in the writing it said that you're writing about the creation of an African American resort. Does that mean a town, or does it mean a vacation destination? What does that mean?
Yeah, good question. So let's talk about the second question first.
Yeah.
Testing.
That's all.
Testing. Maybe battery.
Yes.
Testing. So for this, yeah, that's way better. For the second question, yes, like a lot of these other planned communities are models for me thinking about my protagonist. In the excerpts that I read today, he's still in his rural Georgia. This project eventually leads him to Detroit, where he launches an engineering career. And it's through his professional and urban kind of environment, and it's still like, you know, the late 50s, early 60s. So I'm really interested in the kind of racial divides are still very strong, and so what it means for all of these like isolated black families who have like professional careers at the time, you know, and so he's feeling alienated. Like what you see here, and you can see maybe in this reading how new and excited and anxious Duke is about having a group of kids making him the center. And this is because this is in a time where there's a racial divide, and on his side of the black tracks, he had another divide because of the like class situation. So like these other black families on this side of the track looked at it differently. Like they lived on the hill, you know, they had food, you know, and resources, and they were friends with the politicians and things like that. And so he had nowhere. He couldn't make friends with, you know, the white kids on this side of the track, and kind of barely. And so like these friends, Sam and Peebo, were his doorway where they started like hanging out together and matting, just sitting on a porch and looking and daydreaming together. So he did this all the time, but he used to just have Rita, his sister, and eventually these two friends befriend him, and he has them, and next thing you know, the larger group of kids in the Canebrake come together. So I'm thinking about, like in that moment, he's alienated where he's from, he becomes alienated when he's in Detroit, because now it's like, not only the racial divide, but you have like the labor divide, which had an assumption that if he was a black man, that he would be in the labor movement, you know? But he's like got a corner office in the engineering department at General Motors. And while the people are in the streets fighting for General Motors to work on Sunday, to work 12 hours a day, to speed up the assembly line, he actually has a position where he would benefit from making more cars. You know what I mean? So there's this. And so there are a lot of, and this is fiction, so, but there's a lot of like real people I'm pulling from, where you have like the politicians hop out the car to settle down the kind of like the bubbling tension on the street, and the people on the street are like, look at this guy stepping out of a Cadillac. He doesn't know our plight. You know, that happens all the time, and so to creating a kind of a scenario where I have a main character who is in that position, and so my learning about these planned communities, eventually Duke is going to make an attempt to his inherited land in Canebrake. He's going to try to pull together all the pieces of his life and his society that he likes and bring it together in Canebrake. That's pretty much the premise, is to see how this works out. Like, how will this, when a bunch of like professional, kind of other black members of the professional class are descending on, the Canebrake for a resort, what does that do to the established communities that are already in place? And so this tension of kind of class, like that. And so your other question, like, I don't think class gets talked about enough at large or within the black community, but you are absolutely right. Like, these affluent black communities in popular imagination is like non-existent. And I wouldn't say I deal with it directly, except for I drop a lot of names of people in positions. Like it's funny because I didn't know myself. I started this because I just wanted a character who I didn't want to be caught in the narrative of, because the grand narrative is like, oh, like white people did all this to black people, and now it's up to white people to save them. So I wanted to get I didn't want to deal with that at all. So I wanted my person to be rich, I wanted him to have everything he needed. I didn't want anybody to, like, when you look at him, like, no one needs to help him. He's like an executive engineer at General Motors, and I made it, I don't even know in 1962 this existed, but I was like, I'm making him like high power, high money, family's like wealthy, and he's gonna make wealthy friends, and he's gonna be black. But then I started looking, and then I'm like, all right, I gotta imagine like who's his network. And I started looking up, and there were a lot of people. So I learned that this project, I'm like, how come no one, like they eventually made a movie about the NASA woman who was like basically the computer. I remember coming across her like a decade before that movie comes out. And I'm like, what? And it was like all kinds of, I got notebooks filled up with people. I actually do have a spreadsheet of like Duke's network, like real life people. And it's a long list. It's a very long list. And it doesn't really make its way, that long list doesn't make its way into the project, but it's made its way into me, and I got a little name drop here and there in the project. I don't know if it comes out for the reader, if they're like, wow, there's all this affluent that I didn't know about. But it's there, and I think I do care about that. And I thought I was gonna have to just make it all up from scratch, and I was actually blown away that, yeah, Duke would definitely have organizations that he would belong to that would be, his peers.
We have time for one last question.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you all.
Thank you, Quincy. Thank you.
Yeah.